titled After FTX, Crypto Lawyers and Class Action, What's Next? And the panel will be Mike Canty and Graham Newman. Mike Canty is a partner at Labaton, Sucharow, and Graham Newman is a partner at Chappell, and Newman. With the collapse of FTX, they will share their insights into whether crypto is a security or a commodity. And our pre-conference was quite interesting, so today we're going to continue that discussion. So with that, gentlemen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jay, I appreciate that. Again, my name is Michael Canty, General Counsel and Partner at Labaton Sucharow. I head up one of our securities litigation groups. Prior to joining Labaton, I served as an Assistant United States Attorney in Brooklyn. Before that, I was a homicide prosecutor out on Long Island. So I'm really looking forward to presenting today, having a discussion about what Chairman Gensler has called the Wild West of cryptocurrency. So I'll turn it over to Graham to do the introduction.
Yeehaw! Yeah, my name is Graham Newman. I'm a partner at Chappell, Newman, Columbia, South Carolina, which is probably the Wild West for a lot of folks that live up here. My experience over the past 20 years or so has been in consumer class actions, which makes it really interesting to be speaking.
Can you not hear us?
Let's see. It's probably because it was on.
All right. We made our most brilliant points already. So
that's right. That's it. So my name is Graham Newman. I'm a partner at Chappell, Newman in Columbia, South Carolina. My previous 18 years or so of experience has been in consumer class actions, which makes it interesting to be speaking at an event hosted by Citigroup. I love you guys, promise. This is a really fascinating topic, I think, for everyone. I'm not going to ask anyone if you own crypto, but who all knows people that own crypto? Yeah, pretty much everybody, right? So about 20% of Americans either own it or have owned it in the past, and yet there's very little concrete regulation, at least dedicated to the crypto industry itself. So that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today.
I think you're being generous when you say there's concrete, very little concrete. I don't think there's any. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So I just want to ask, I'll pose the kind of the seminal question we need to answer here. What is crypto? How many of you think it's a security?
No commitments.
Okay, good. How many of you think it's a commodity? How many of you think it's neither? I mean, we have, and I'm going to pay you all comment, we have a room full of very, very smart attorneys, business people, and we don't have a definitive answer. What does that mean? It means that our elected leaders in Washington certainly don't have an answer either. Chairman Gensler has been fairly clear about the fact that this is what he's described as the Wild West. And if you can't define it, you can't solve the problem. I think it's one of those issues that who's going to take charge? You have an issue here. I would call it a crisis with respect to oversight of the crypto industry. And if you don't know who's responsible for monitoring it and regulating it, I think everybody sees that's a problem. I'm not for overregulation. Let me just start off by saying I think that there's roles for government administration, government entities to provide proper oversight. But even the chairman of the Commodities Futures Exchange Commission has said that both Congress and some of the administrative agencies are engaging in what's known as paralysis by analysis. Everybody keeps looking at this issue, saying, what do we have here? And nobody has really tackled the issue. So the question becomes, whose responsibility does it become there? And what you're seeing is oftentimes where government doesn't act, the private right of action, you have individuals bringing cases on behalf of consumers that have been defrauded. Graham makes a great point. What we're seeing here, especially those, when you talk about the Commodities Futures Exchange Commission, you don't have trading commission. It's usually not something that retail investors are really paying particular attention to. But now you're seeing 1 in 5 investors is involved in the cryptocurrency exchange. So, Graham, I guess the question I have for you is, where does what is an investor to do, and what are some of the pitfalls with respect to not having this proper oversight?
Well, there's another scary term that's being kicked around a lot is regulation by enforcement, right? So it's basically like, I drive into the state of New York and I don't know what its traffic laws are until I start getting pulled over. And I don't know how serious of a offense I just committed. I don't know whether there's a civil penalty or a criminal one. But we find out when the cops pull us over, and that's kind of what's going on right now. It's a little maddening, particularly if you're pumping a lot of money into it. When we say the crypto economy, we're talking about $1.3 trillion worth of investment right now. So that sounds a little wacky, and maybe we should start with FTX, since this is after FTX. But what exactly was FTX? This guy, 1.3 trillion, you can't find a code. I don't know. So, this is Sam Bankman-Fried, who I think was 32 when he was arrested last fall. And FTX is what we call a centralized exchange, where you could exchange things like American dollars or euros for Bitcoin or Ether or any other host of crypto tokens. And FTX went belly up starting in mid to late September, I believe it was. And I think the loss is about 20 billion. And now young Sam is on bond, living in his parents' house, and we'll see what happens to him. But Mike, I think one of the things that we should point out about FTX first is that it's not necessarily the result of what cryptocurrency itself is, but maybe something more traditional, the investor fraud, some of the things.
This had all the earmarks of the Ponzi scheme. When I was as a former federal prosecutor, I prosecuted a lot of Ponzi schemes, and this really has all the earmarks. And I don't care if it's crypto or any other business venture, if you don't have proper oversight, the human condition will take over, and there are individuals out there that are going to look to take advantage of consumers. And this is not a crypto problem per se, this was a problem of just complete lack of oversight. And why was that? Well, the SEC did not look to take action. We had an individual that, when I say it has all the earmarks of a Ponzi scheme, you have to think how courageous you must be to go before Congress and testify about how you're the most secure exchange, how you want to make sure there's more regulation. I mean, you're essentially hiding in plain sight, and you're committing this massive fraud, the levels of which we have never really seen before. And the question becomes, how does that happen? Well, it happens when, I'll be quite candid, when you deploy a tremendous amount of resources to elected officials, when you tell them what they want to hear, when you say that you're all for transparency, and nobody actually looks at your books. Nobody actually kind of digs and looks at what's going on. Nobody asks the tough questions. The campaign contributions are made, the testimony is given, and everybody, presumably everybody's making money, so there's no questions asked. Nobody looked at the books. Nobody asked, well, what's the relationship between Alameda and FTX? Nobody asked the questions on what's the true value of this coin that you made that was collateralized to allow Alameda to take all this money from FTX investors. So this just has traditional fraud written all over it. But the question becomes, why wasn't it caught? I think one of the reasons why it wasn't caught was nobody wanted to grab the reins. For those of you who are football fans, right? It's like the old adage: if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. Nobody wanted to take responsibility. The SEC was not saying this is security. We're going to have proper enforcement. We're going to have registration statements. We're going to have quarterly disclosures to investors. None of that's going on. When that doesn't happen, that allows somebody like this to carry out a fraud on that level.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the, I don't know if he's a trustee, but one of the individuals in charge of the bankruptcy case involving FTX was also in charge of the Enron bankruptcy, which I think now is over two decades ago. But he said that Enron, and we all remember what a massive disaster that was, paled in comparison to what's going on at FTX. So we'll see what shakes out from all that coming up. But another problem I think in terms of someone taking the reins is, what the heck is crypto? Well, the basic technology of cryptocurrency is computer software. Right? So when I went to college in the late 90s, the big thing when I was a freshman was Napster. And I will not admit in public to ever operating Napster. Let's just say I knew a lot of people who did. And crypto is similar in that it is distributed software that you can download for free on the internet. And it's essentially a spreadsheet. You see in the background Excel. And what those digits are is an account that belongs to Binance, one of the biggest centralized exchanges, that I downloaded this morning. You can go online on etherscan.io, which is one of the blockchain explorers, and download the transaction history for anyone that's been operating online. So there you've got the centralized currency, the distributed ledger. So again, we all share the same Excel spreadsheet if we're running the same software. And the data on that ledger is immutable, meaning it can be added to, but it cannot be changed. So how is that possible if we're all sharing the same spreadsheet? Well, this is where the crypto comes in for cryptocurrency. Cryptography, very advanced math, is used to preserve the integrity of that data going forward. But where's the investment come in? Well, that's where the folks that are processing this math, the computers, you've probably heard that Bitcoin burns up a ton of electricity, and it does. But that's how you mine that network. To give people the financial incentive to run the software, you award them Bitcoin or Ether or whatever native coin there is to that particular spreadsheet. So that's where the currency comes into existence that can then be used as a means of exchange or investment over the coming weeks, months, decades.
And Greg, you raise a good point when you say it's immutable, right? You can add to it, but you can't erase anything. I mean, right away, I hear that, and the first thing that I think of is fraud, right? How can you manipulate this data to demonstrate to somebody that something is going on now when it in fact happened in the past? We saw that in mortgage fraud, right? You saw mortgage fraud where properties were being flipped before titles were being registered with the county. I mean, we talk about fraud. If there's a way to carry it out, whether it's on a sophisticated blockchain technology like this, or whether it's through the transfer of a title of a deed into a home, there are individuals that are out there that are going to look to carry that out. The open question for the group, I'll ask you, Graham, but I'll ask the group as well. I mean, who is providing security for this? Who's overseeing this? I mean, nobody. That's the answer. This is open source data that is susceptible to any type of cyber attack. So that and think about that when you invest in a traditional security, the type of due diligence that you do, the information that the researches that you look at, and the security that corporations will put in place to make sure that their data is protected. This is all open source computer program that's essentially unsecure.
Yeah, it'll blow your mind a little bit. The other answer is everybody. Right. And the reason why that is the way that the code is written is what is true is what 51% of the computers operating the software says it is. And so if there's something that's called a 51% attack, then you can go back and change the data. So what you're relying on, when people have faith in the US dollar because it's backed by the US government, right? Not gold in Fort Knox. People have faith in Bitcoin because it's backed by the Bitcoin network. It's sufficiently decentralized that you'll almost never be able to generate 51% of the computer power to change the data. But that's getting a little bit into the weeds. Let's take the next step. But by the way, before we skip ahead, as a lawyer who's trying to prove fraud, who's trying to prove damages, this is already getting my attention. Because number one, these are fingerprints that can never be wiped away without one of those 51% attacks I was talking about. And damages that are readily calculated on an Excel spreadsheet. This is music to my ears. What crypto is not is anonymous, and this is a huge misunderstanding for most of the public. What you see below that word anonymous right there, that is what is called a public address, and that is the public address for the Binance account that I just showed you all that data on. So what I can do is by entering that address into a little search screen that looks a whole lot like Google, is witness every single transaction that account has ever encountered. So take this pulp address and call it, I don't know, Mark Twain. And as soon as you associate that Mark Twain name with Samuel Clemens, then you know everything he's ever written. So what we call crypto is pseudonymous information, but once the pseudonym is taken away, everything lays there for public consumption. All right, primary crypto use cases. On the good side, banking for the bankless is a good thing. Crypto, if you look at Bitcoin on any given day, there's a good site called coinmarketcap.com. It'll show you the swings in prices. You'll see it go up 10% in 24 hours. They're go down 10% in 24 hours, which is maddening if you are, let's say, a car salesman, a car that you were selling for $30,000, you're now only getting $27,000 worth of cash out of it. This is why you don't see a lot of crypto used in retail transactions. But if you live in Nigeria or Venezuela, a 10% swing ain't so bad. So you see this in a lot of countries right now. The use is picking up where governments or the economies are just so bad that the faith in Bitcoin is stronger than the faith in government. So there's a potential for use within American society for those who don't have access to bank accounts. Again, let's say if you got your weekly check from your boss in Bitcoin, at that point you don't have to go to a cashier to get the actual money that you can spend. We're still a little early on for that right now because again, they can't take Bitcoin to the car dealer to buy the family car, but there's potential for that. Obviously, there's potential for investment with 10% swings daily if you made the right call. You can pocket a lot of money. But then comes the crime and the fraud, and it is rampant within the blockchain community.
Yeah, I think you saw the case the SEC filed against Terraform, where Terraform was claiming that they could do this banking, they could do the direct transaction, when they really weren't. They were going back and they were doing it, they were essentially putting it in after the fact. The idea of allowing the transaction to be instantaneous, that's a game changer. So we go again, turn back to traditional fraud when, if there's a way, else Terraform was making claims that they were able to do this essentially simultaneously to the transaction, which would allow for that free exchange of Bitcoin or whatever the cryptocurrency was, and they were lying about it. So you have the SEC bringing these actions. It's interesting when we look at what does the landscape look like. The cases that you're seeing being brought are really traditional fraud cases. You're not having 10b5, or you're not having, fault. Obviously, there are no registration statements. So you're not having false statements, made with registration statements. You're having the traditional fraud cases where, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission is bringing cases that they talk about involve traditional fraud. You're looking back at statutes that they're pulling from that exist outside of the scope of cryptocurrency. So the question becomes, will they ultimately look to pass legislation that deals directly with decision?
Yeah, so let's take a look at the primary players in the legislative and regulatory arena. So these are the three big ones right now. Securities Exchange Commission, we asked you if it was a security. If it's not, their applicability to this conversation is questionable. The CFTC is a commodity. And then, of course, FinCEN is a currency. What sort of money laundering is going on? What sort of counterfeiting is going on? And let's see this.
Well, yeah, just real quick on that point. I mean, Chairman Gensler has made statements before Congress where he said we don't have the regulatory tools. And the case against Coinbase becomes the question. What is the first motion to dismiss argument they're going to make? They're going to say that the SEC lacks authority to bring an enforcement action against us because they don't have oversight. There's one organization here, obviously I'm partial to, that is not on this list that I think ultimately can always bring a case, that's the Department of Justice. And the question becomes, is there going to be kind of a tipping point where we're going to have, we talk about paralysis by analysis, where ultimately you're going to get a U.S. Attorney's Office, presumably here in New York, hopefully in Brooklyn, that says, look, enough is enough. We have the tools, we can bring in criminal actions against some of these entities using, Judge Rakoff referred to, I think it was at the time, mail fraud as the Stradivarius of the federal prosecutor in its elegance. And I think the same could be said for wire fraud. I mean, ultimately, that tool, that weapon that the federal prosecutor has in bringing the case, this is tailor-made for a wire fraud case. So we'll see. Especially if these organizations are going to have finality as to who's going to be ultimately responsible.
Yeah, it's interesting that we said, well, where would we bring the action? We're talking about decentralized software here, right? And saying, where would we establish personal jurisdiction? A little bit easier in the Southern District of New York if traditional companies are operating under the NYSE, right? But what if the person who's kind of created this computer software lives in the Southern District of Texas and has never been to New York City?
Or has never been to the United States?
Yeah, so is there any jurisdiction at all? But say the person lives in Iceland, but is, Americans are buying this coin, and frankly, part of the computer network is being run in the United States. So all sorts of big questions. The last time I gave this talk, somebody said, are you running into any problems with personal jurisdiction? My answer was yes. So, big questions, again, going unanswered. But let's go back to Chairman Gensler to see what he testified to from Congress just a couple weeks ago. Hopefully this will work.
Oh, right. There we go.
So what do you do?
Ether is one of the most popular digital assets and powers the Ethereum blockchain. Back in 2018, then SEC Corporation Finance Director Bill Hinman stated that he believed Ether was not a security. Last month, CFTC Chair Benham expressed his view that Ether is a commodity. The State Attorney General of New York asserted in a court filing last month that Ether is a security. Clearly, an asset cannot be both a commodity and a security. Do you agree?
Actually, all securities are commodity under the Commodity Exchange Act. Is that we are excluded commodities, but I would agree that a security cannot be also excluded commodity and an included commodity. I'm sorry, Chair, just to talk about the Commodity Exchange Act more precisely.
Okay, so do you recognize, how would you categorize Ether then?
Look, I think that the general sweep of what Congress did, not just in the 30s, but as amended.
I'm asking you to sit in your chair now to make an assessment under the laws as exist. Is Ether a commodity or a security?
Without speaking to anyone.
I know you've repeatedly said you're not going to speak to one, except you've spoken one, Bitcoin. So I'm asking you to speak to a second one, the second largest market cap here.
In speaking to the tokens, there's 10 to 12,000. If there's a group of entrepreneurs,
I'm asking about one.
The public is anticipating a profit based on the.
I'm asking you a specific question, Chair Gensler. I said this in private. This should be no shock to you. I'm asking this question. Is Ether a commodity or a security?
And again, it depends on the facts and the law, and if there's a group of individuals.
I'm asking you about the facts and the law sitting in your seat and the judgment you are making.
And so, Mr. Chair, I think you would not want me to prejudge because I'm also.
But you have prejudged on this. You've taken 50 enforcement actions. We're finding out as we go, as you file suit, as people get Wells notices on what is the security in your view, in your agency's view. I'm asking you a very simple question about the second largest digital asset. What is your view?
And my view is if there's a group of individuals in the middle that the public is.
All right, so let me just ask a second question. Do you think it serves the market for an object to be viewed by the commodities regulator as a commodity and the securities regulator to be viewed as a security? Do you think that provides safety and soundness for the product? Do you think it provides consumer protection? Do you think it serves the value of innovation? I think no should be a very simple answer for you here.
I think
that uncertainty is bad, is it not?
And I think that Congress has said that there's one agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission, under this committee.
And you won't answer my question, and you're the head of that agency. So give me a break. Come on.
I'm answering it in generic because you would not want me to speak about any one set of facts and circumstance.
Okay, but you've already spoken. Have you said anything about Bitcoin?
My predecessors and the agency itself has spoken to them.
Okay, so you're not willing to do the same about Ether. Okay, so let me just step back. There's a lack of clarity here in the marketplace. Can you at least agree to that?
I think that the clarity is there, the law is clear.
All right.
There's a
So
group
let
that
me
individuals
be
rely on.
explicit about this. The market doesn't see it. Your regulatory actions and the CFTC's regulatory actions say that there's a great deal of uncertainty here. It is the intention of this committee to fix that uncertainty and actually provide sound legal basis for this.
Your thoughts?
I'm waiting for Congress to do something here. I mean, I think it's readily apparent that the SEC is not willing to commit one way or the other. It is interesting that they brought up those enforcement actions. I think it goes back to your point before, Graham. The market wants to know, and I think investors want to know, so they have the clarity before the enforcement action is brought. I will, in defense of Chairman Getzo, I will say some of the enforcement actions they're bringing, again, fall outside of the scope of whether or not you really need to determine whether this is a security or not. I mean, I think that's a jurisdictional question. We're talking about real fraud, right? So you're looking at some of these actions that, I believe there was one defense attorney that raised their hand before. I mean, if I were defending this, I think this is probably an issue you'd raise from a jurisdictional standpoint. But when you look at some of the cases that the SEC has brought, I don't think that if a court is unmoved by that argument, it's not going to really help your case, because they are bringing these cases that have a lot more meat on the bone with respect to the fraud.
Yeah, and the lack of committal is probably a result of him wanting to prevent this video from being exhibit number one in many different cases, I would guess. But so let's talk a little bit about Ethereum, because that's where the conversation started. Ethereum is a second generation blockchain, Bitcoin being the first. Bitcoin came out in January of 2009, but it was purely a product of software. There were 50 Bitcoin created in the first block of that blockchain, and it went from there. Ethereum was different. There was fundraising that was done. I believe they called it an ICO. You might know what that means. Initial coin offering, and I believe something like $400 million was raised right here in New York. They had a big party at Tavern Green after all the money came in, and some people got really, really rich. If y'all are familiar with the Howey test, which is kind of the centerpiece of whether or not something is a security, it all comes down to whether or not this is an investment contract, where you pay somebody money with the anticipation of making more money off of their efforts later on. And my guess would be that Ethereum at that point in time was in fact a security, but there's a 1-year statute of limitations on my cause of action, so they're probably okay right now. So, what are your thoughts?
I think you're right. I mean, look, ultimately the question, and it comes back to the title, where does this leave us with these cases? I think that you're going to see, there are going to be cases brought. I mean, even on the security side, we're seeing cases brought with respect to companies that are engaging in trying to mine. And we saw a lot of cases where companies were making assertions that they had growth because of the traditional product they were engaging in, but they were really mining. And then when the price of Bitcoin plummeted, there was lack of incentive and again stock dropped. So there are all these ancillary cases that you're seeing. I also think when we look at some of the bank cases that you're seeing now with a lot of these regional banks falling, going into receivership, going to bankruptcy, if you kind of trace, you follow your steps, it's going to come back to a lot of the stuff that we saw with FTX and a lot of investments in Bitcoin, losses in Bitcoin, and ultimately, in order to run a business, you need capital. And then you had the run of the banks because people wanted to make sure that their capital was safe. Comes back to the point we made right away. Without clarity and without proper oversight, this is going to be a problem moving forward.
Let's take a look at the types of class actions that are emerging out of this industry. So there are 3 major types that we run into. The first of which are going to be your centralized exchanges like FTX. Obviously, as soon as FTX dropped, we saw a bevy of lawsuits filed throughout the United States. And I think, Mike, you told me that the leadership fight over the 10b-5 case has just been argued?
On Silicon Valley, that will be on the Silicon Valley meeting we were talking about, that's Friday. But what you are seeing with a lot of these cases, again, I'm repeating myself, but you look at the it should not have, it would have taken a cursory review, and I think Binance is a perfect example, right? For those of you who follow FTX, hiding in plain sight, they're borrowing, the Alameda is borrowing FTX investor capital, they're securing it with really, which was a made-up coin, the FTT coin. And what happens? All of a sudden, everything gets exposed. Sam Bankman-Fried turns to Binance and says, "Come and save us." It took them less than a day. They did less than a day of due diligence, and they were like, "Absolutely not. We're not going near this." So that really speaks volumes to, even with just a moderate level of oversight, a lot of this could have been exposed. A lot of really saved a lot of consumers a tremendous amount of money. When you look at due diligence, oftentimes these things take months and months and months. It took less than a day for Binance to look. It's not a wilting flower when it comes to stepping in and taking advantage in the crypto arena. So absolutely not. We're not doing it.
Yeah, in Coinbase, another big centralized exchange who has been very friendly with Congress at this point, has also been sued primarily over data security, one of your areas of expertise. Remember, this information is out there for public consumption. The one thing that keeps it safe for you, that public address, data sent to it, the currency sent to it has to be unlocked with a private key, which is essentially a fancy word for a password. But once those passwords have been compromised, if centralized exchanges who are hosting that information on their networks aren't able to protect it, then all of a sudden you're talking hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars in losses.
Or billions. I mean, in the case of Sam Bankman-Fried, one of the latest charges that's been added, we wrote an investor alert for our clients, and we did one when the indictment came down, and we did one when the cooperators pled guilty. And eventually we said, well, we're going to write one every time the news comes out. The latest we have, right, the allegations that he bribed government officials in China to unlock some of this money, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So again, DOJ having the tools to bring traditional cases against free. The irony here is we talk about how this is supposed to be, free and open, and the reality is he had to bribe government officials in China to unlock some money that he claimed was his. So
yeah, yeehaw. Okay, the next, and this is one that's of particular importance to me, are altcoins, which are basically Bitcoin and Ether imitators. And most of these exist on the Ethereum network. And the reason why is I said that the Ethereum network is a second generation blockchain. Remember those little blocks on that Excel spreadsheet? I'm sure if you know a little bit about Excel, more than me, you know how to create formulas on each little block, and it will churn out additional data based off of what you put in there. That's essentially how Ethereum works. You can create computer programs that exist within the blockchain itself. So what folks have done is create programs that say, hey, give me 10 Ether, and my little program here will give you 15 Shoecoin. That's essentially how they work. They become investments in and of themselves, or what we call shitcoins. Because
we didn't monitor that, by the way.
Yeah, not we, the royal we. We'll get into a little bit of more discussion about how those go down. And then the aiding and abetting cases, which we're seeing with Mr. Wonderful and Shaq and Larry David, also
Tom Brady.
Yeah, all coming. Yeah,
I'm a Giants fan, and anytime I get an opportunity to shout out Tom Brady.
So you didn't see Elon Manning showing that.
Exactly. Come on, that was funny.
Yeah. All right. So the centralized exchanges, the big three, well, not anymore. FTX is no more. We know, but Binance controls about 50% of the market. And again, this is where you take your dollars and you get Bitcoin, or you get Ether, or you get a host of other tokens. When Chairman Gensler used that word tokens, and he said there are thousands of them, it's probably an understatement. I've seen discussions that there are hundreds of thousands. Most of them go nowhere. But on these centralized exchanges, you'll have an opportunity to buy some, if not most of them. Coinbase and FTX were American-based companies. FTX a little less so because they had a Bahamas-based entity where they used to hawk some of these lesser reputable tokens. Coinbase, US based. But they've been talking recently about establishing their own international entity because they got a Wells notice. We heard that term during Chairman Gensler's speak. That's essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, with the SEC saying we're investigating you and we think you may have done something wrong.
Right. And look, even if the SEC decides to step in and say, look, this is a security, you run, and they register abroad and it's traded abroad, you run into the Morrison problem, right? Where you cannot bring a case, you can't bring a case, a securities case in US courts if it doesn't touch the US. Question becomes, do you always have jurisdiction with these computer systems? I mean, are you going to be able to say that a wire somehow went through the United States? It's not being used on a traditional exchange where you say, look, if it's not on a US-based exchange, it's not a US-issued security, therefore you have your Morrison issue. I mean, does this get thrown out the window when you have Bitcoin or you have some sort of cryptocurrency? Isn't it always going to affect interstate commerce in the United States? I would say yes. I think you'd be hard pressed to run one of these organizations without a trade or some sort of transaction occurring within the United States. But an open question.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly the way that the agencies are looking at it right now. So, you touch our shores, you consent to our jurisdiction. Now, actually getting to the money is another question. If the bad actor is based in Kazakhstan, good luck. If he's got, again, we'll talk about aiders and abettors in a little bit, and we're starting to see some of the action go in that direction because of questions as to whether the SEC, the CFTC, private plaintiffs lawyers like me can actually find the proceeds. So let's take a look at the altcoins or the shitcoins, which name I prefer. So this is a case that I've got right now, and HEX is a token that exists on the Ethereum blockchain, and it began to be sold in December of 2019, and it was advertised as the next great thing. Of course, they're all advertised as that, right? And it had a good run from about January of 2001 until September of 2001. 2021, excuse me, yeah, that would be wonderful. The value you could buy on, again, these secondary exchanges, a single hex for the price of about 5 cents, and then it spiked to about 50 cents. Well, guess what? It's now back down to about 5 cents. So if you bought at the top, which my client did, you lost about 90% of your investment. So here we are. Now, this case comes to me about a year ago, and I'm researching it and I'm preparing my complaint. And you probably can't tell who the individual is on your screen.
Any guesses? No?
All right. His name is Jordan Belfort. AKA the real Wolf of Wall Street. He's out of prison, by the way. Great movie. Don't use him as a model. But out of prison, he's got a YouTube channel. So as I'm prepping my complaint, my defendant shows up on this YouTube channel. So, yeah.
It always helps.
Clients. Yeah, so we can play this one. By the way, they're talking about SEC registration requirements.
Because you get the sucker, you get the sucker, you get the suckers in there, that I think is going up 100-fold because or else they're not going to buy it, right? So my question to you is, okay, so obviously you love cryptocurrency, right? There's some very smart people who hate cryptocurrency. I like cryptocurrency, I think it's fraught with fraud. It desperately needs some regulation to stop the fraudsters in there. But
everything's wrong with fraud.
And that's true, but what happens is, in the absence of regulation, it gets so fucked up.
Regulation doesn't help. Regulation doesn't help.
It does help.
Payday loans are legal. There's literally 1,000% of your income.
I'll tell you what,
Enron was.
Celsius, it stops.
No, they got passed and turned off the regular retail customers and just took the credit investors and turned it down. It was legal. It was legal.
If you think that, well, I know both worlds. Wall Street is not as bad as crypto, and Wall Street's corrupt as shit. okay? Wall Street's a corruption, a sewer of corruption, and crypto's a sewer of corruption times 1,000. There's no disclosure in crypto.
Disclosure is a scam. Disclosure is a fucking scam.
How's that?
You know 100% that no one reads those fucking documents. You know 100% that no one really gives a shit about those disclosures. You know 100% that when you tell someone they can lose everything, they don't really fucking believe you. You would have to spend 50 minutes showing them videos of people crying, having lost it all, for them to have a chance of actually being like, oh, this might actually go down.
So you think disclosure should
No, I think that disclosures are weak, limp dick legalese that doesn't actually say fucking nobody.
That's his defense.
What do you think was quoted in about paragraph 8 of my complaint? It's debatable what disclosures, what protection they pose, but I know two things. They are neither weak nor are they limp dick. So we'll find out what happens later in the case. But this is an example of the market, of the dangers in the market that are out there. As people like this are out there pushing these products. And I can tell you that probably about $100 to $150 million has been poured into this guy's project.
And the reality is the decision has been made, right? With the Securities Act of 1933, Congress has said it doesn't matter. It's strict liability, and it's worked, right? You have Section 11 claims. You have to tell the truth in an IPO. I appreciate that he thinks nobody reads these things, but we're coming up on 100 years of that law, and it's well settled. And I think it's long past that those same requirements are applied to the currencies we're talking about here today.
Yeah, and so, I mean, what would you disclose on these disclosures? Well, how does this computer program actually work, right? What exactly am I investing in other than the guy that shows up on YouTube and Twitter however many times a day? There's a lot of complaints that you will see on social media about, well, tell us how to do it. And the SEC may have some responsibility here for not clarifying it, but that we need to pull back the shower curtain and see who the wizard is that's controlling this stuff. So there we have this generation of litigation. Perhaps even more fun, however, are these guys. There's your boy. I see your boy right there, right between Larry David and Giselle. By the way, I think Giselle exited stage left after this picture was taken, didn't she? Yeah. So all of these guys were hired by FTX to push FTX, right? And now they're all subject of a number of lawsuits right now. There's Steph Curry, Mr. Wonderful, we got Shaquille O'Neal, who apparently is a lot faster in real life than he was on the basketball court because he evaded service for about 3 months. But if you're, let's say, if FTX, you're worried about insolvency, right? You've gone into bankruptcy. Let's say your finance is run by a guy who we don't know where he's at. He's publicly bragged about preferring to stay in places like Malta that are perhaps not friendly with extradition treaties and whatnot. So if you can't find the money, like any good plaintiff's lawyer, you're going to go find somebody else who might be responsible. So both sides of the bar, folks need to be wary of potential liability when you're stepping up and lending your name, image, and likeness. Also, you college players, watch out to these types of programs. So, what do you think, Mike? Would you, if you had a situation, let's say a major data breach at FTX, or again, just a collapse as a plaintiff's lawyer, you see these guys up there, you liking your jobs?
Yeah, well, I think the broader question is, with the advent of technology, let's step back, right? How do you invest? Back in the day, you had somebody that did investments for you, or you had a stock portfolio. Now, you can set up for your children. You can set up an account for your kids through TD Ameritrade or any of these online trading platforms. And the question becomes, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, right? You've been in a conversation, or sometimes I was just quietly listening, you're on the side of a soccer field or an athletic field, and they're talking about, I know this guy that bought this Bitcoin or this Ethereum or some sort of cryptocurrency, and you got it for like a half a penny, and now he's a millionaire. Yeah. And somebody hears that, and they go, wow, what am I missing out on, right? And then they go in there, there's absolutely no oversight. it reminds you of the stories you heard about from the late 20s, early 30s of last century, where people were saying, oh, well, you know, this stock is, you know, it's all prospecting, it's not true investing. So, you know, this leads to that. When you have Steph Curry, when you have Tom Brady, very successful, very, very wealthy individuals, Mr. Wonderful, who I think that's even a little worse, right? Because this is a guy that touts himself as a sophisticated investor. Look, I think that there's exposure there.
Yeah, I think so too. And you're exactly right about how these conversations go. And if you venture into Twitter and just do a hashtag Bitcoin and read the threads, and you know, Bitcoin, by the way, it's sitting on, as of yesterday, I think it was about $29,000 a coin, which is still unbelievable. But that's off of a high of about 67,000 18 years ago. So what you will see dominating the threads is, what a great investment opportunity this is. Come on, now's the time to get on. When it's back at 67, you'll hit yourself for not investing. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God. Yeah. But yeah, it's FOMO, hashtag FOMO, fear of missing out, dominates the ecosystem. And so when these guys come in here and gals and lend their public image to these types of products, that helps people get pushed a little bit more to where they might click that purchase button and put an unbelievable amount of fiat currency into extraordinarily risky investments.
Graham, let me ask you this. I mean, we've seen on the consumer side, you know, over the last 2 decades, and for those of you in the tort space, individuals hawking products on TV or late night, and there's been liability there. Do you see cases where you can kind of analogize it to those individuals, you know, cancer cures, buy my book, The Cure All Cancer. We all know that guy, I forget what his name was. And there were cases brought against him. Do you see cases like this where you have these celebrities saying, this is a wonderful product, you know, it's secure, you should invest?
Yeah, I mean, FTX is probably the prime example now, and we've not reached a resolution of those lawsuits yet, but I think there will be some payment. I've seen some of the other smaller figures involved in the FTX matter, some of the YouTubers, frankly. They're not famous outside of that sphere of, you know, crypto folks that watch everything on YouTube and think it's the gospel. But they've come out and said, yeah, you know, I think I'll pay a little bit to the fund, and we'll see some liability. You know, how much, who knows? But yeah, I mean, you know, deep pockets, right? That's what we're talking about law school, first semester of torts. You find the deep pockets, and right here, if FTX winds up being a whole lot of nothing, these guys will be contributing to whatever pans out in terms of the final resolution. But how do we get there? How do we prove the case? We talked about it a little bit at the outset. Let's talk about the details. All right, this you probably can't see a lot of. It's a little blurry. This is what we call blockchain tracing. The blockchain, again, is the spreadsheet. And by following the money between different accounts, you can show relationships between accounts. You move money here, there. You can show things like market manipulation. You can frankly find just thievery. I had a case come in last Friday. I had a Coinbase account, $30,000 went missing. In about 30 minutes, I was able to use some specialized software to figure out where it went. Now, I don't know the name of the person that took it, but I know the path that it took, because he was frankly foolish enough to never change the denomination after he stole it. And so we use this kind of software to figure out. The two biggest right now are Chainalysis and Elliptic. And we'll say Chainalysis came out of what was called the Mt. Gox bankruptcy. Mt. Gox was the original centralized exchange of Bitcoin, and something like in excess of $150 million went missing. And there were these computer scientists that were hired, and they were able to use their skills and their patience of going through the blockchain information to find where much of the money went. Well, then they realized, holy cow, we've got a skill or a product that is very, very valuable, and this increasing in terms of volume and dollar amount ecosystem. And so they're now a big company. When I got my case, I read a book called Tracers in the Dark, and it tells the story of the development of Chainalysis and how they help bust these guys. I just said, well, hell, I'll call Chainalysis. And so I called them and said, yeah, well, I'm interested in hiring you. And they said, oh, great. What agency do you work for? I said, I'm a private lawyer. And they went, no, they didn't literally do that, but figuratively they did. And they patted me on the head and said, listen, Sonny, we work for the IRS and the FBI. I said, well, how much does it cost me to hire you? They said, we do an annual fee. What's the fee? $100,000. Okay. Are there other options? And there are, fortunately. And there are now blockchain tracing companies that license that software that will do it for, a couple $100 an hour, the way that our traditional experts do. Elliptic is the same way. They're one of the primary challengers, and they will put together visual roadmaps, like Mike said, that you can use in front of a jury to say the money went here, the money went there, the money went here, and wound up into this account.
We have about 10 minutes left. We had a couple other points we want to make, but we certainly want to open it up for questions. So why don't, do we have anything else we want to cover quickly, or?
Yeah, maybe, let's see. Yeah, so that the last stop is the off-ramp, right? And what the off-ramp is again, a centralized exchange. So you can steal 100,000 Bitcoin, but it's worthless to you unless you can spend it somewhere. So if you want that Lamborghini, you're probably going to need dollars, and you're probably going to need euros. And so you're going to go somewhere like Coinbase or Binance, and you're going to cash it in. This is where we cash it. Why? Because if you're a money transmitter, particularly in the United States, you've got to follow what are called know your customer regulations / anti-money laundering regulations, which requires you to know the name, the address, social security number, etc. of the person that's transacting business on your exchange. And so at that point in time, if we can trace the money to an off-ramp, that's when you find out who you're dealing with. So, again, this is us. Send us your cases. Of course, we'll follow the money for you. What questions do you have? Yeah?
You elaborate a little on the composition of the class, the primary representing consumers.
So in my case, but I'm representing purchasers of the token. And so this is a Section 5 case. So a 10b5 case is the one that's most commonly known, what we hear most about in law school, and that's your securities fraud case. This is the sale of an unregistered security, which is akin to like a mail fraud or a wire fraud case because it's strict liability. It says if this is a security and you sold it and you did not register it with the SEC, then you have to pay back any of the money that was spent on the security itself. So it's very simple. It's an elegant solution. But when we start getting into these cases, then all of a sudden we have subpoena power. And oftentimes you start finding additional causes of action and additional parties that also may be liable.
So are you ever in a situation where you're representing institutional money?
You could be.
Yeah, I mean, on the 10b5 side, I primarily bring 10b5 cases under the PSLRA. And that's why this is a particular concern, because you cannot bring a 10b5 case on behalf of a class because it's not considered a security at this point. So ultimately, if it's designated as a security, it will be registered, and then all registered users would, if there's fraud, would be members of the class. And that would involve institutional investors if they had invested in whatever cryptocurrency you're looking at that was involved in fraud.
Yeah. Now, so theoretically, there could be massive institutional investors involved in my case, but I think that's probably just in theory. There's some big institutions that come out publicly and say, we've got a big position in Bitcoin, big position in Ether, but I've not heard of any big institutions that would invest in either one of those.
A lot of, look, we know that, and this is all public, but a lot of large public pension funds and public institutions, they have limitations on where they can invest their money. And that should kind of clue you in. If they are the trustee, they're entrusted with the retirement of teachers and police officers and judges, and they're saying, look, we've got these limitations on where we can invest, and they're not investing in this area. You probably should raise the caution flag for the retail investor, and that's where we're seeing this. We're seeing this really on the retail side, and interestingly enough, I think it was Chairman Ben testified last year. This is before FTX. He testified, or didn't testify. He was on a panel similar to this, and then an FTX head of government regulations got up there. He said, "Well, our average transaction is $100,000. It's the institutional investors. They're moving in big positions. So we're talking about real money on behalf of retail investors. And it was really the retail investors that took the brunt of those losses in FTX.
Yeah. Now, on the flip side, there are huge industrial investments that are going into, in particular, Bitcoin mining farms. And so you'll have buildings as large as a Walmart that have nothing but banks of computers where they've invested tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into these farms with massive computing power. That's the other thing that goes into Bitcoin. It's a race to figure out who guesses the right answer to this cryptography. And so what used to be able to be done with a laptop, I mean, I can download the software now, but I'm never going to validate a block, which is what the mining is. So we have, even in South Carolina, we have very cheap power there. So we've had big Bitcoin mining farms pop up because they can do it at a fraction of the cost of what it would be here in New York State. Well, okay, but they also have investors that have helped buy that real estate, that helped buy that equipment. And all of a sudden, Bitcoin goes from 67 to, it was down to as low as like 16 earlier this year. Now you're talking about derivative cases and all sorts of other stuff. You're going after the people that made the decision to make the investment. And so it is a burgeoning economy for litigators. But at this point, it's still the Wild West. But we stand to be the sheriffs, so we'll stand in the boots of the White Earps of the world and bring some sort of sense to what's going on.
Yeah, I remember back when, I was saying 2001, 2002, you had celebrities like Jake Paul, all these people backing the shit coins for what seemed to me like pump and dump schemes.
Yeah.
Is that something you guys are going after, or something that's you think will be regulated going forward, where maybe they have to disclose the amount of money they received these companies or how much of the coins they had?
Yeah, so like even in my little case, there are examples of potential pump and dumps, not from anyone that popular, but there was 3 minutes, thank you. There was a very interesting pump and dump scheme that came from the primary person involved in it was John McAfee. It was very popular in this circle of people. I don't want to denigrate anyone, but McAfee died shortly after this happened, but the token went from like a penny to about 15. And what they also call it is a rug pull, where the people that own most of the assets cash out, and of course the bottom falls out of the price and they're gone. So I think we will see.
You can't halt trading.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the other thing. You can't really, you can't halt the trading, right? So you have situations on markets where government regulators can step in and they can intervene if they see something. You don't have that here. When we talk about that, that's really a key component. It's completely unregulated. Any questions? Yeah.
Hey, full disclosure, I'm at Emmanuel 100% FTX and bankruptcy as special counsel, so I deal with this a lot on the defense side. I'm curious on the plaintiff side, how do you, because I know in my day is figuring out a lot of stuff is a huge mess, and you have to figure out things like before claims even filed, and you don't have access to the documents that we have. So how do you think strategically, as a plaintiff's lawyer, you need to figure out who bought the coins? Did they buy them on secondary markets? What wallets do they have? And like even thinking about that before you know it's a good claim or not a good claim.
I mean, my wife has accused me of cheating on her with my defendant. Literally. And because it takes so much time. I mean, I go home and I sit on Twitter, I go through everything he's tweeted, I go through the ledger trying to figure out where the transactions are going. I've bought, every book I can put my hands on, and it's a lot, but it's an emerging market. Frankly, for me, it's fun. It's I'm sure the Wild West is fun, so long as you don't end up on the wrong side of an arrow, right? Beyond that, I don't know what else there is to do. Learning about the tech, number one. Learning about the tools that work within the tech, number two, and applying that to the existing laws.
Yeah.
So if the SEC succeeds in moving Coinbase and maybe any other smaller exchanges offshore, how is that going to affect what you all do as far as identity and asset recovery?
So it wouldn't affect asset recovery unless Coinbase is the problem, is the party that's liable, right? But here's the problem. I don't think they'll ultimately be successful. And the reason why is the U.S. accounts for about 40% of the market. And so unless Coinbase and Binance and the other big players want to abandon by far the largest market, I think the next biggest is Germany with about 10 or 11%, then they're not really going to go offshore. So it's a little bit of an empty threat.
Yeah, I also think that the investors want it on U.S. exchanges. I mean, there's a huge benefit, and I think that that's ultimately what they're going to come to realize is that, consistency and predictability and security are what investors want. And that's why when you look at U.S.-based exchanges and you look at securities that are traded on U.S. exchanges are so successful, right? I mean, historically, the market's always won. And I think when you look from 1930 to the present, if you were a long-term investor in the market, you're a winner. You're a big winner. I mean, the numbers are just astronomical when you look at it. And I think one of the reasons is because we have the proper oversight, we have the proper laws and tools to make sure that the market is fair. People understand risk. I mean, the one thing we always deal with on the 10b-5 side is how do you convince a jury, look, that people take risks? And we appreciate risk. What they want is a fair shake. They want companies, corporations to tell the truth, and they want to know when they put out quarterlies or annual statements that they have the truth, and that's what goes to the markets. I think it's a fool's errand to think they're going to take it all offshore because then it's going to be completely unregulated. Somebody will fill that gap. There will be another cryptocurrency that says, look, we'll play within the rules of the U.S. Regulators, and we'll have success because investors want that. And you'll see a huge influx of money and capital into that market because this is my opinion, but I think that's what investors want. They want to have that predictability and stability.
Yeah, I don't think the SEC necessarily wants to drive it offshore either. And I do think there are certain Congress people who do. I know Senator Warren has flat out said that this stuff should be banned, but I've not heard that outcry from anywhere close to the majority of the folks in Congress.
I don't think it can happen. I mean, I think that ship has sailed. I think the idea is you're going to have the status quo, or you're going to have all these ancillary fraud cases brought, or you're going to have legislation passed that says these are securities. You're going to have IPOs. You're going to have disclosures, and companies are going to decide whether they want to completely go offshore. But again, I think somebody's going to fill that gap in the U.S. market, and they're going to, I think, get a great success because people like the product. Any other questions?
All right, guys, thanks so much.
Thank you very much.